Hi everyone, welcome to Jawaras. Let's continue our discussion on securing single page applications with Spring Security. So far, we have created three servers: front-end server, resource server, and gateway server. Front-end server was responsible for authentication and serving the Angular application. Resource server is the one with secured resources, and gateway server is routing the request to either front-end server or resource server based on the path of the request. And front-end server and resource server are sharing the session using Redis database. You can find all the videos in this playlist. I will put the link in the description, and you can find the code in this GitHub repository. Now, in this video, we are going to talk about OAuth2. Before discussing OAuth2, let's talk about authentication and authorization. Authentication means who is the user. Just to get the basic information of the user, authentication is used. In authentication, server verifies whether the user is actually the one he is claiming to be. For example, user provides username and password, and server will verify or look for the information in the database to check whether the username and password is correct or not. And it may have some additional steps like two-step verification and everything. So that is a authentication. So authentication basically basic information about the user like email ID, profile, address, name, these things. And authorization is basically what the user can do. That means what services, data, or functionality can the user access. Whether the user can write something or if he is only able to read something, whether the user is normal user or he is an admin. So these kind of things, that means everything related to access is related to authorization. Now let's see what is OAuth2. OAuth2 basically it's a set of specifications that allows developers to easily delegate the authorization of their users to someone else. That means we don't have to keep the information of the users in our database. We don't need to implement many things related to user management. We can just take help of something else, and that is called authorization server, and we are good to go. Two things to note. First is OAuth2 is a specification, it's not an implementation. OAuth2 just specify what should be done, it doesn't specify how it should be done or how it should be implemented. And then there is another keyword called authorization, that OAuth2 doesn't deal with authentication. OAuth2 does not know who the user is, it just needs to know what the user can do. Then how do we manage authentication? That's where OpenID Connect comes into picture. OpenID Connect is an identity layer built on top of OAuth2. So OpenID will send the information of the user after authentication to the third-party applications. Now let's see why do we use OAuth2. Let's say there are three scenarios. First is we, we have an app that wants to access user's email from Gmail, and then we want to create a task in the Google Task. And here Gmail and Google Task are the services where user already have an account. So what can we do? First solution is we can get the email address and password of the Google account of the user and store it in database, and then we can use those email address and password to access Gmail and Google Task. But obviously user will not provide us the email address and password, and we should not store that. The another scenario is, let's say we want to read the timeline of user from Facebook, and we want to create a summary of the timeline and send an email to the user. And how do we do that? The third is, let's say we want to use users investment portfolio from any brokerage service, and we want to generate profit and loss summary. So that also is possible using OAuth2. How it's done, I will come to that in a moment. Also, let's say if we don't use OAuth2, if we implement authentication and authorization on our own, we need to manage users in a database. We need to make sure that we don't store the passwords in plain text. We need to make sure that our database is not accessible by anyone else who is not supposed to access the database. And we need to implement front end, back end, all the services related to creating an account. if the user wants to sign in, if the user forgets password, we need to implement forgot password functionality. We need to implement reset password functionalities. Apart from that, we may need to implement update email ID, update name, update profile, these functionalities as well. So if we use OAuth2, we can eliminate all these things and we can focus on business logic. Now there are four main roles in OAuth2 architecture. First is resource owner. So that is who is the owner of the data which we want to access. So in most of the cases it is user, but sometimes it is a machine as well. Second is client. Client is the one who wants to access the data. Authorization server is the service where the information of the user is stored. Authorization server is responsible for authentication and authorization. Then there is resource server where the data is stored. In a typical use case, client wants to access resource owner's data from resource server using an access token which it gets from authorization server. And let's go back to these scenarios and try to find all of the two roles. So in the first scenario, we want to access user's email. Who is the owner of the data? User. So user is the owner. And our app wants to access the user's email. So our app is a client. And where the data is stored in a Gmail service or in the database of Gmail. So Gmail is resource server. And where do we get the access token from? So you may have seen there are buttons to log in with Google. So Google is the authorization server. If we want to create task in Google Task, in this case as well, Google is the authorization server. Google Task is the resource server. Our app is the client and user who is using our app is owner. Accessing users' emails is a access, and creating a task is another kind of access. Whenever user will log in with Google to our app, then Google will provide us an access token which will have these two access: accessing user's email and creating task. Similarly, in the second use case, the resource owner is the user, the client is our app. The action or the access which we need from Facebook is reading user's timeline. The resource owner is Facebook because our data is stored in Facebook, and authorization server is also Facebook because user will log in using Facebook. So in some cases, authorization server and resource server can be same as well. So authorization server, resource server, and client. So these are responsibilities. These are not individual server. So they all can reside on the same server as well. So it's not necessary that they are separate server, but in most cases they are separate services. So they are hosted on different servers, different domains, and these kind of things. But it's not necessary to be on separate servers. This is a typical workflow of Auth2. So let's say here resource owner is Bob. So he is our user of our app. Now Bob tells client that I want to access my account. Then client tells Bob that I don't know you. I don't know what permission do you have. So it will tell Bob that this is the authentication server's URL and authenticate here. Give your credential, authenticate to the authorization server, and tell the authorization server to allow me. That means allow client to access Bob's account. So our login page screen will appear in front of Bob in the browser. Bob will enter credentials. And it will tell authorization server, okay, allow this client app to access my account. Authorization server will validate the information entered by Bob, and it may have some additional steps like two-factor authentication, and it will tell client that Bob allowed you to access his account. Authorization server will send an authorization code to the client. Then client will send that authorization code back to the authorization server and say that, okay, I want to access Bob's account information. Give me access token related to that. Authorization server will send access token to the client. Now client can send that access token to resource server where the account details of Bob are stored, and it will tell that I got this access token from authorization server. Then resource server will send that, or it will verify that access token from authorization server, and it will verify what access does it have. So authorization server will tell that this is a valid token, and whoever holds this access token should be able to access Bob's account information. Then the resource server will give the Bob's account details to the client, and client will send the account details to the Bob. There is something called OAuth grants. So OAuth grants means authentication flows for obtaining access token from the authorization server. First is authorization code grant, which we have seen in this diagram. In the OAuth code grant, whenever user log in to the authorization server, then authorization server will send a authorization code in the browser URL, and using that URL, client can get access token from the authorization server. So this is called authorization code grant. Then there is implicit grant. So in this type of flow, when the user logs into the authorization server, it will directly give the access token. It won't give authorization code. But you should not use implicit grant. It's not secure. Then there is resource owner's password credentials grant. That means he stored the username password of the resource owner in the database, and whenever you need access token, the client will send that username and password to the authorization server and will get back the access token. Don't use this as well. Then there is client credentials grant. So this is used for machine to machine communication. So let's say there is some access token which is required and which is related to client only. Then client can send its client ID and client secret to the authorization server, and authorization server will send one access token which will be related to the client only. It will not be related to any user. It will be related to the client, and then client can use that to access its resources. There is refresh token flow. We have a refresh token. We can send this refresh token to authorization server, and authorization server will give us back the access token. We will talk about refresh token more in the next slide. Then there is authorization code grant with proof key or code exchange, which is called PIXI. This is same as authorization code grant, but it is more secure than that. This is used in single page applications and native applications like Android and iOS apps. Now let's look at authorization code grant in a little bit more detail. So there is authorization endpoint. It is the URL where user enters their credentials like username and password on the authorization server's website. After successful login, the authorization server redirects the user to a URL which is called redirect URL, and it appends authorization code in that URL, and that authorization code is retrieved by the client. So client sends authorization code with client credentials to get the access token, and this token endpoint is defined in the authorization server. Then authorization server will send back access token. It can also send an ID token, and it can also send refresh token. So access token is used to access resources from resource server. ID token is used to identify the user to get some information like profile information, email, name, address of the user. And refresh token is used for fetching the access token again and again without user's intervention. ID token will be sent only if OpenID Connect protocol is enabled on the authorization server, and refresh token will be sent only if the refresh token auth grant type is enabled for the client on the authorization server. So in this video, we will only look at authorization code grant. I want to go into much details of OAuth2 in this playlist. I may create another playlist for OAuth where we can discuss OAuth in more detail. But in this playlist, we will only focus on securing single page applications. So there are many options to have authorization server. You can create your own, you can download some software, or you can use services which are available online. In this video, what we are going to do is we are going to use the Spring Authorization Server. So using this, we can create our own authorization server. If you want to know more about OAuth2 and OpenID Connect, these two are good websites. I will put the link in the description. So we will be using this Spring Authorization Server. So you can go to this website and you can learn more about how to create authorization server, how to customize it, how to configure it, and everything. So let's do that. I will create a new Spring Boot project. I will use Gradle as build tool, Java as language 3.1.1 as a Spring Boot version. Then this is the group artifact. I will specify everything. Then packaging will be jar. Java version we will use is 17. and we need only one dependency, which is called OAuth2 authorization server. So you can search here OAuth2 authorization server. Since we have already added, it's not visible here. So we will use this OAuth2 authorization server and click on generate. It will download a zip file. So extract that zip file and open it in your ID. So I've already opened it in IntelliJ IDEA. First, let's look what we are going to achieve. So this was our earlier architecture. Now we want to go to this architecture where our UI server and gateway server will be same. So this will be responsible for rendering the Angular app and also routing the request to resource server if required, based on the request path or whatever parameter we can use. So we will create three services: authorization server, resource server, and UI or gateway server. In this video, we will create authorization server, and resource server and gateway server both will talk to authorization server. I want to run authorization server on port 8083, so I will use this configuration server.port 8083. Now we need to configure authorization server. So let's do that. So first of all, I will create a new Java class in the config package authorization server config. This will be a configuration. Here we need to return a bean of type security filter chain as we have all done in the previous videos. Public security filter chain. Let's say authorization filter chain, and let's say authorization server security filter chain. I get an HTTP security and it will throws exception. Let's return http.build. Now here we want to configure it. So let's apply the default configuration of OAuth2 authorization server. So we can say OAuth2 authorization server configurations dot apply default security and HTTP. That's it. And let's say whenever the user is not logged in, but we want the user to be logged in, so we need to handle that uh, exception where the user is not logged in. So for that we can say http dot exception handling, and here we can handle many exceptions. So for now let's handle uh, not authenticated exception. For that we need to specify default authentication entry point. So I will say default authentication entry point. Now let's give it a login URL authentication entry point, and the URL is /login, and this login page will have HTML. So media type will be HTML. So new media type request matcher, and it will be text HTML. Our authorization server should have some clients. So in the real world, the clients will be fetched from database, but for demo purpose, we will store the client in the memory. But you should never do that. Let's create a bean of type registered client repository. Not inside this method, outside these methods. Bean registered client repository, and let's create one client. So it will be registered client. Client equal to registered client dot with ID. So this is not client ID. So this is a unique ID, and this is the client ID. So let's say client, and we need client secret. Let's say secret, and then we want to specify which types of authorization grant types we want to allow. So we have already discussed the possible types of the OAuth grants. So let's define some authorization grant type. So first we want authorization code, and then let's say client credentials. And since we have defined client credentials here, we need to specify how the clients should be able to authenticate. We want the client to be authenticate using client ID and secret. That means basic HTTP. So let's do that. Client authentication method, and I will use client secret basic. And let's define some scopes dot, let's say profile. Now we need to specify redirect URI. So this is the URI where user will be redirected to after successful login with the authorization code. And we will configure this correctly after in the next video, I guess. But for now, let's put anything here. I will just say HTTP localhost 9000. Let's say this. So we can put anything here for now, and let's build it. Now we can return new in memory registered client repository and pass in a client here. So our client is created. Now we need one more bean, and its type will be authorization server settings. And let's return the default settings. Server settings dot builder dot build. So we will return the default settings. Now let's run the application. The authorization server is running, and it has created one user for us with the username user, and the password is this is string. And let's test it. So I will go to Postman. This is Postman client. Click on new request. Go to authorization tab, and type will be OAuth 2.0. And here grant type I will choose authorization code. You can choose from this list. I will choose authorization code for now. This callback URL, this would be same which we have specified here for this client, this callback URL. And we need to provide auth URL. So this is the auth URL for the authorization server, which is the URL of the authorization server, then OAuth2, and then authorize. So this is called authorization code endpoint as well. And access token URL, this is token endpoint. We just need to replace authorize with token. And we need client ID and client secret. So This will be same which we have provided here. And scope, we need to have at least one scope. And for this client, we have already defined this scope here, profile. So its value is this profile in lowercase. So we specify this scope here. And client authentication, which is basic auth header, because in the client authentication we selected or we specified basic here. Now let's click on get new access token. So we are getting this error page. This is because we have not specified HTTP security to use form login. Let's do that. I'll go to config, create a new Java class called user management config. This will be a configuration file, and here we need to create a bean of type security filter chain, and I will give it name user management security filter chain. It will take one parameter of type HTTP security. Let's call it HTTP. It will throw error of, and let's return HTTP dot build. And here we want to authorize all requests. So let's just say HTTP dot authorize HTTP requests auth z or z dot any request dot authenticated. So we want that each request should be authenticated, and we want to use form login with defaults. So it will use form login to authenticate the user and annotate it with bean. Now this is of type security filter chain. We have another bean in the authorization server config of type security filter chain. So we need some ordering or the priority. So here I will say order 1, and here I will say order 2. So if the order is less, then priority is more. Now let's refresh it. I will copy the password, cancel authentication, click on get new access token, user and this password, click on sign in, and click on proceed. Now we are getting something else here, and if I see in the error, I'm getting this exception. Okay, there is no password encoder mapped for the ID null. So this is because we have specified registered client repository here. So whenever we specify client repository or user repository, user detail service, then we need to specify the password encoder as well. So let's define a bean of type password encoder, and let's return. For now I am using no o password encoder, which stores passwords in plain text, but you should never use this password encoder. So let's rerun the app. We don't want to use this token. Let's delete all the token. So server has started. Copy this password. Click on get new access token. Enter user as username and this password. Click on sign in. Now we get this screen, authentication complete. Click on proceed. Now you can see we get this access token here, and we get nothing else. So let's copy this and go to a website jwt.io, and yeah, paste the token here. And here we can see the audience means the client ID. So this is client, this is subject, this is the user name, which is user, and this is scope which we have requested for profile. This is the URL of authorization server, and this is the expiry time of the token. So we are getting this information, and now let's say I want to get the user information as well. So who the user is. For that we need to enable the OpenID connect, which is disabled by default in Spring Authorization Server. So to enable that, uh, first we will get the configurer, this OAuth2 authorization configurer, OAuth2 server configurer, and then we can say OIDC and with defaults. So now OIDC is enabled in the authorization server. Let's restart the server and click on get new access token again. Username will be user and password will be this string. Copy it, paste it here, sign in, click on proceed. Still we are not getting the ID token. Why? Because we have not asked for it. So in the scope we have only specified profile, we have not specified OpenID. So to get the information of the user we need to specify that scope here, OpenID. So you can see the scope of the access token, it may have multiple space delimited value. Okay, so we are sending two scopes. Click on get new access token and we are getting error. Okay, so we don't see anything here. Let's see if we see anything here. So the error we are getting is because we are asking for these two scopes, but for this client we have not defined these two scopes. We have only defined one scope here. So let's specify that scope here as well. That is OIDC scope dot OpenID and restart. Okay. Copy the password. Now let's click on uh, get new access token, and now we can see the login screen. Click on sign in and proceed, and we got the access token as earlier, and we got the ID token as well. Now let's copy the access token and paste it in jwt.io website. Now you can see in the scope we have two values, OpenID and profile. Similarly, let's copy the ID token and paste it here. You can see we have information about the user, but we don't have much information about the user in the authorization server, and neither did we ask for it. So it's not much. But here we can see the authentication time. When did we authenticate? That's it. Now let's say we want to get refresh token as well. That means we don't want to prompt the user to log in again and again, like after every 5 minutes. So because this token is valid for 5 minutes only by default. So let's do that. You can see expires in 299 seconds. That means 5 minutes. Now let's do that. So enable the refresh token authorization grant type. So I will say grant type refresh token. That's it. Let's refresh it. Copy the password. Click on get new access token. Username, password. Now you can see we got the refresh token as well, along with ID token and access token. And whenever this token expires, after expiry, we can see here refresh token button that will refresh the token automatically. Now one additional thing, if you don't want to copy this password again and again. What we can do is we can create a user detail service here. So let's create user details service. In the earlier videos, we specified the uh, username and password in application.properties. Now this time let's create a bean of type user details service and create a user with username, let's say Javarus, and password, let's say pass, and let's give some authority, let's say read and build. And I want to store the user in memory, so we can return new in memory user details manager. So user details manager extends user details service interface, so we can return the instance of user details manager. And in memory user details manager is a class that stores the details of user in the memory, and we can pass the user. And please note that whenever we create a bean of type user details service or registered client repository, in that case we need to create a bean of type password encoder as well. So don't forget to do that. We have already seen that we got one error when we created a bean of type registered client repository, but we did not create a bean of type password encoder. In that case, we got an error. So remember to do that. So we have done that. So we have created a one user here, Javarus. Let's restart the app. And here I am storing the user and client details in memory, but you should never do that. Always use a database to store these, and never store any type of credentials in the code. And this time you can see in the terminal we don't see any username or password being printed. Let's click on get new access token. This time username is Javarus, password is PWS. Click on sign in, proceed, and we gave to all the tokens. Let's copy the access token and paste it here. And you can see subject is Javarus, and this is the client, and these are the scopes. That means the client app can perform these actions. So that's how we create authorization server using Spring Authorization Server dependency. In the next video, we will create a resource server and we will see how we can use this access token to access the resources of resource server. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and share it, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Until then, bye.